What's up, everyone? It's Adar coming at you with another episode of Startup Engineering Daily. Let's hop right into it. So, our first story today is a pretty exciting one. xAI has been acquired by SpaceX. They are now one company. I believe xAI is all of the Grok stuff, and they also own the X.com platform. So now SpaceX covers all of Twitter/X and Grok and all of the data center stuff they're doing there. I think also MacroHard is under xAI as well. And it's pretty interesting. They have a whole blog post that goes into it. They talk about how essentially the future of SpaceX is launching space data centers where they can use electricity from solar power, I guess, and satellites to do compute remotely, so running in space and I guess transmitting back via high frequency radio or some other method of communication. But I don't think they'll be transmitting the power back. It'll just be information and they'll be doing all the compute remotely. And I'm sure there's some built-in latency with light speed and all of that that'll be accounted for. But I guess in like near Earth orbit, it's probably not that bad. But they do plan to launch beyond the moon as well. They said even landing on the moon and doing some compute there is what they're looking forward to. And it's a pretty interesting post for sure. And they go into a lot of the details as well of what they're planning to do. It doesn't really speak to how connected the X and the SpaceX piece are together, but obviously they're both Elon's companies and he's trying to build this greater company as well. Now we'll have to see if they can roll in Tesla as well to just have a single company. And then on the same story, we also have a tweet from Chung Fan just showing a timeline as well of Twitter being acquired and being moved into X, and then xAI raising a bunch of money, being worth $50 billion in December 2024. I remember that when that was announced. Then they acquired X in the all-stock deal, and then they raised $5 billion at 136 and raised $20 billion at 230. And now there is an assumed IPO that might be happening in the middle of this year. I think Anduril is also kind of on the block potentially this year for an IPO. So that's very fascinating. Obviously, all of the IPOs like kind of pop up and then go quite down, like Figma and all of those. And so, yeah, kind of a cool little timeline here. And it's really cool how you can start these companies. If you have the right team, you have the right funding, you can just move super quick. And I wouldn't say I use Grok myself frequently. You know, I do use it to like analyze tweets by just pressing the button, but it does seem to be a pretty capable video and language model apparently by the benchmarks. So that is pretty impressive that they can pull that off, you know, after Elon invests or like donates to OpenAI and then gets scammed essentially out of the company, that he can just recreate a competitor like that is pretty impressive. And then one more tweet on that story as well is from this guy, Dylan Patel. I don't know what company he works for, but saying that Google now owns more than 10% of Anthropic and xAI, and that Google owns 7.5% of SpaceX here in the community note. So that's pretty cool as well. Google always staying ahead of the game. We'll have another story about Google on this episode as well, but they're just always winning and eating on every investment in Google Ventures and all that, just always winning. And now they're really hyped up on the LLM space. They haven't really launched anything. Like Anti-Gravity was their IDE that they launched, and you know, it kind of, people are using it, but it's not super hype like Claude or Cursor or any of those. So we'll have to keep a look at what they launch. You know, they're not really products, but in terms of investing, like they're always killing it. And next we have a tweet from Malte, I think is how you say his name. He is the CTO of Vercel. And just a quick little tweet, but I found it interesting, where he's saying that software is free now with a footnote that free as in puppies. And essentially I had to look into this. You can kind of, I guess, intuitively figure out what it means, but there's different levels of freedom, right? And especially like in the open source community, they're very in tune with different understandings of what freedom means. So one of them is like free as in freedom, right? Like you're free to say or do whatever you feel. And then they have free as in beer, which is like, you know, the cost is free, it doesn't cost any money. And then they have another one that's also free as in puppies, which is like it's free to obtain, but then there's a lot of cost involved in maintenance into owning that piece of software. Is it the example for open source software, but whatever it is that you're looking at, you know, it takes maintenance and has costs associated with it being free and given to you. So they're saying that in the age of AI, and this is a clear principle that people are starting to understand, but you know, it is very easy to like catch the hype and be like, oh, I can work on 50 projects now because of AI. And maybe there is a place where it's like you can do one-off projects that don't really require maintenance and just ship those out and try to get revenue from that, which I totally understand. And I have a very smart colleague who believes that methodology can work. But at least in terms of live services, right, and like SaaS services, you can't just have infinite projects. You need to have people on call. You need to have systems. There's companies to be built around it. There's funding and revenue, employees, all these different pieces that go into building software in 2026 essentially, and especially in the AI boom as well. And we have a reply here from Drew Bredvik, who is building GTM at Vercel. And there, I saw a tweet kind of related to him where apparently at Vercel, they had like a sales team of 10 people that they reduced to one person just using like in an agent that Drew built. So he's very much in the world of building these agentic solutions and like adding new software, not just like working on brownfield or like older mature projects. And he's saying this too, even if software is free to write, it is not free to maintain. Who gets paid? So that is kind of the end of the day. First principles is like who is on call. And it's so fascinating because all these business stories and like startup stories, you never hear about people on call, like it's just kind of assumed that like the app works the way it works. There's outages, people get mad, and stuff like that. And I guess I don't know if outages used to happen more than they do now, but they do happen frequently, and we'll talk about that in another story as well. But there is like so much infrastructure and systems that have to go around delivering these live services, things that touch money, things that touch identity. So it's interesting. And it gets back to the idea of like AI, I really think counterintuitively is making it so we kind of like are really encouraged to follow the best practices and like focusing on a small number of projects or even one project ideally, one startup ideally, I think really is going to pay a lot of dividends in the AI age versus working on 10, 15, 20 different projects at once. I really think is not going to work. And like using Claude, like yes, you can run Claude while you're asleep and review PRs in the morning, but you can't do that across 20 projects. It's just not going to work. And then next we just have a little fun one from Garry Tan, who is the CEO and president of YC, which is Y-Combinator. They've invested in a ton of massive companies like Stripe, Airbnb, DoorDash, etc. They kind of started incubator game, or at least they excelled at it the most of any incubator for sure in terms of market cap. And Garry Tan as well is known to have angel invested or seed invested in Coinbase, and also he designed the logo for Palantir. So he definitely has credibility. He's very well known in the industry, but he's saying that Ruby on Rails plus Claude Code is a crazy unlock, and that Rails was designed for people who love syntactic sugar and I guess he's saying since they know so much about the syntax and understand the very deep complexities of it because they just have the docs in front of them compared to us where like we kind of have to remember it to write code, that they can take advantage of all these quick little syntactical advantages that you can use in Ruby on Rails. And also he talks about kind of the opinionated structure, as opposed to JavaScript where you can have like a folder wherever you want. You can use all these different frameworks, React, Next, Express, etc. Whereas in Ruby, it's like all the models, all the data goes in here. These are the different access patterns and then services and migrations and tests as well. And it's funny too, because in the description, he says he's averaging about 10,000 lines of code per day. 35% of the lines are tests, and he's going for 15K a day, which is interesting. I wonder what he's working on. That is quite a bit, and I'm sure people are going to clown on the idea of measuring by lines of code because that's such a classic meme. I don't really keep track of how many lines of code I write. I look more at like Jira tickets, right? And like initiatives that can be delivered, but clearly he's delivering something, and I think unit testing as well is going to be really solid in the age of AI, but I do think you also just got to actually use the product, and that's where it kind of adds that human bottleneck still, where it's like you can't look at 10 different browsers at once. And Theo here in the replies as well, he has a great tweet about this separately that maybe I could have covered, but it's kind of old news, after 2 days. But he talks a lot about that as well, where it's like you have the IDE, the browser, and the terminal. You have these different applications where it's like, you're writing it in Cloud Code or you're writing it in the IDE, and then you have the browser as well where you need to test it or take a look at it. So those are the pieces that can't be asynchronously done by agents yet. I know there is browser usage and all these things and opening it in sandboxes, but it's not quite at the level of like human testing still. But it does speak to a piece of like, how can we really get continuous delivery and continuous integration where it's like we can write tests that are so good that if they're green, we know we can merge to prod. And I think that's something very interesting to think about. And, I don't really care language one way or the other. I do TypeScript, obviously. I haven't done too much Ruby, but whatever gets the project shipped is what's important to me. But in terms of like which stacks I'm betting on for the future of the AI boom, definitely my colleague who put me onto the idea of doing full stack expo, I really think he's onto something. If you can just have one repo that delivers web and mobile in one and also the API routes for most things. I know for some things you'll have to have a long running route or some server that stood up so you can do batch execution or temporal or whatever. But you can use everything in Expo. I really think that delivers a lot. And in my opinion, like SaaS still to this day, the main way we're accessing things is through websites and through mobile apps. So those are the main user touch points you'll have to focus on. But why code it in Next.js? I mean, you can use Solido obviously to make it work on React Native. I don't have experience with that, but it's like, why use a framework that isn't going to support mobile and web in the age of AI where everything can be in one repo? You can have your Claude.md, which they show works better than skills specifically because the agents don't know how to check the skills. So not to get too deep into it, but I definitely think Expo in one repo is going to be really nice. And I think Rails is not going to catch on again, but I could be wrong. Next, we just have a quick but interesting one. I'm a big fan of Waymo, and we have Sundar, who is the CEO of Google, just announcing an incredible milestone that Waymo has raised $16 billion to accelerate their mission, and the company is valued at $126 billion. They've done 20 million rides to date, apparently, and also the investors include Sequoia, Andreessen Horowitz, Kleiner Perkins, ton of companies. Like I think it was 20 different funds investing in the $16 billion round, which makes sense. And next we just have a tweet from Oracle. I'm not too tapped into all of this, but essentially there was a deal between Nvidia and OpenAI where Nvidia was apparently going to invest $100 billion in OpenAI, but there's been some rumors that it's stalled. And there's an interview with Jensen, who's the CEO of Nvidia, kind of going back and forth with this reporter and kind of getting a bit upset because the reporter's saying, what's up with the $100 billion investment in OpenAI? And Jensen's like, well, we didn't commit to $100 billion. We just said we were able to invest up to $100 billion, and we'll do that if it makes sense, essentially saying. And I guess the main part of the conflict is actually from the OpenAI side, where they're saying that the NVIDIA chips might not be super optimal for what they're trying to do, and they're exploring other options with AMD, it seems. I'm not too tapped in on the performance. I know NVIDIA was ahead of AMD for a very long time, but maybe over the last few years, AMD's been able to catch up a little bit. But Oracle comes out with this tweet saying the NVIDIA OpenAI deal has zero impact on our financial relationship with OpenAI. They remain highly confident in OpenAI's ability to raise funds and meet its commitments. So that's kind of funny. And they have these like replies from a bunch of people saying like, I mean, talking about t-shirts is nonsense, but if you scroll down, they're like, why is Oracle even commenting on a third-party deal? Please stop tweeting. This is the kind of tweet you make when the NVIDIA OpenAI deal does impact your relationship. FTX liquidity is fine type tweet. So I can't read too much into this. I'm not much on the finance side, I'm more on the engineering side, but it's definitely interesting to stay up to date with these deals and how it's affecting all these massive companies. And I was reading a tweet earlier that was talking about something separate, but it was referencing OpenAI and how they only have a few thousand employees, I believe, or like 7,000 employees, which kind of makes them like a mid-market company in most cases. But because they're such a high scale and innovative company as well, on the other hand, it kind of brings them up to these other companies where it's like Oracle is massive, NVIDIA is, one of the most highest market cap companies in the entire world. So very interesting, something to keep an eye on. And then the last tweet is just something that I find interesting, which is that GitHub Actions had an outage today for about 4 hours or even more. It was quite intense. A lot of people like to hate on GitHub because they go down more often than you would think they would for being such an important company, and everyone's banking all of their infrastructure and their code backups and all this stuff on GitHub, which totally makes sense. It does beg the question of like, is there going to be a replacement? If you look into the Y-Combinator link as well, if you look into the Hacker News link here as well, it shows that apparently Azure was having some problems with their VMs. They were stopping auto scaling, I guess. It was one of the people in the replies was talking more about it. And it's really cool how Hacker News like has these people so deep in the game that you can kind of get that information. This was like the best I could really find when searching Twitter for GitHub Actions Outage. But it was super obvious because it was down for a long time. You weren't able to really make any deploys or anything, which means we're all beholden to these guys to make sure their platform works. But it's not the end of the world, and it's up now. We'll see if people like Linear, for example, I know that they're adding code review. It kind of makes sense up to a certain point now that AI needs all the context of the code of like, can these project management platforms own the code instead of GitHub and kind of add version control layer to their system? But then it's also interesting, like, is Git even the modern tool that we want to use in the age of AI? Because it speaks to that thing of AI makes it so that old tools make more sense because all of the training data is there. But then it's also like, because of ergonomics of using AI, it does beg these new tools to kind of be invented as well. And like code management, having work trees, all these different pieces weren't really thought about when we could have infinite agents running at once. But they were thought about when we had a bunch of humans running at once, on these large teams. And that also speaks to the fact that I really believe that AI is kind of reinforcing the best practices of engineering. And instead of being super spread out and super distracted, we should be super focused on what we're working on and managing the code base that we own and understanding how it works from a deep level, from a mental model perspective. So just something interesting. This kind of stuff interests you and you want to talk with some like-minded people, join the Audinato Discord in the description. Thanks.